Throughout history, the world has been captivated by individuals who have managed to deceive on a grand scale. These master manipulators have assumed false identities, fabricated elaborate backstories, and infiltrated the highest echelons of society. Their audacious schemes have left us both astounded and perplexed, challenging our perceptions of truth and identity. From cunning spies who lived double lives to brazen con artists who fooled entire nations, the stories of history's greatest imposters are as fascinating as they are alarming. These individuals didn't just tell lies, they became their lies, often maintaining their deceptions for years or even decades. In this video, we'll delve into the extraordinary tales of some of the most infamous imposters in history. We'll explore their motivations, unravel their complex webs of deceit, and examine the lasting impact of their actions. Prepare to be amazed by the ingenuity, daring, and sometimes sheer luck that allowed these imposters to pull off some of the most audacious deceptions the world has ever seen. Join us as we unmask history's greatest pretenders and discover the thin line between reality and illusion that they so skillfully blurred.
The life of Philip K. Dick. Double lives have long fascinated us, capturing our imagination with tales of secret identities, hidden agendas, and the blurred lines between reality and deception. Throughout history, individuals have led dual existences for various reasons, some for espionage, others for personal gain, and some simply because their true selves didn't fit into societal norms. These complex narratives of duplicity and duality often blur the lines between fact and fiction, much like the works of one of science fiction's most enigmatic authors, Philip K. Dick. Philip Kindred Dick, born on December 16, 1928 in Chicago, Illinois, was a man who seemed to live multiple lives, both in his prolific writing career and in his personal experiences. His life was a tapestry of reality and imagination, woven together in ways that often made it difficult to distinguish between the two. This blending of fact and fiction wasn't just a theme in his writing. It was a fundamental aspect of his existence. Dick's early life was marked by tragedy and instability. He was born 6 weeks premature, along with a twin sister named Jane. Sadly, Jane died just over a month after birth, an event that would haunt Dick throughout his life and influence many of his works. The loss of his twin created a sense of incompleteness, a theme that would recur in his stories about duplicates, simulacra, and alternate realities. As a child, Dick moved frequently with his mother following his parents' divorce. This nomadic lifestyle may have contributed to his ability to adapt and create new realities in his mind. He was an avid reader from a young age, devouring science fiction pulp magazines and classic literature alike. This voracious appetite for stories would later fuel his own prolific writing career. Dick's professional life as a writer began in the 1950s when he started selling short stories to science fiction magazines. His first novel, Solar Lottery, was published in 1955. From there, he embarked on a career that would span 3 decades and produce over 40 novels and 121 short stories. But it wasn't just the quantity of his output that was remarkable. It was the quality and the themes he explored. Dick's writing often dealt with themes of reality, identity, and perception. His characters frequently found themselves questioning the nature of their existence, unsure if they were human or android, living in reality or a simulation. These themes weren't just literary devices for Dick. They were reflections of his own experiences and perceptions of the world. One of Dick's most famous works, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, later adapted into the film Blade Runner, explores the question of what it means to be human. The protagonist, Rick Deckard, is tasked with retiring, a euphemism for killing, androids that are nearly indistinguishable from humans. As the story progresses, Deckard begins to question his own humanity, unsure if he himself might be an android. This blurring of lines between human and machine, reality and artifice, was a recurring theme in Dick's work and his life. In The Man in the High Castle, Dick presents an alternate history where the Axis powers won World War II. The novel features a book within a book that depicts a world where the Allies won, our reality. This layering of realities, where fiction exists within fiction, mirrors Dick's own experiences of perceiving multiple realities simultaneously. Dick's personal life was as complex and tumultuous as his fiction. He was married 5 times and had 3 children. He struggled with mental health issues, drug abuse, and paranoia throughout his life. These personal struggles often found their way into his writing, adding depth and authenticity to his character's inner turmoil. But it was in the early 1970s that Dick's life took a turn that would blur the lines between reality and fiction even further. In February and March of 1974, Dick had a series of experiences that he referred to as February 3rd, 74. These experiences, which he spent the rest of his life trying to understand and explain, involved visions, auditory hallucinations, and what he believed to be contact with a divine entity. During this period, Dick reported seeing a pink beam of light that transmitted information directly into his mind. He believed he was experiencing anamnesis, a loss of forgetfulness, and that he was remembering his true identity as a persecuted Christian in ancient Rome. He also reported visions of alternate realities and believed he was receiving messages from an entity he variously called Valis, Vast Active Living Intelligence System, Zebra, or God. These experiences became the basis for several of his later works, including Valis, The Divine Invasion, and The Transmigration of Timothy Archer. In these books, Dick explored themes of divine intervention, hidden realities, and the nature of consciousness itself. He also documented his experiences and theories in a massive journal he called his Exegesis, which ran to over 8,000 pages by the time of his death. The February 3rd, 74 experiences marked a turning point in Dick's life and work. From this point on, his writing became even more focused on questions of reality, identity, and the nature of the divine. He began to see his earlier works in a new light, believing that he had been unconsciously writing about deeper truths without realizing it. Dick's exploration of these themes wasn't limited to his fiction. He gave several speeches and interviews where he discussed his experiences and theories. In a 1977 speech titled, "If You Find This World Bad, You Should See Some of the Others," he proposed the idea that we might be living in one of many simultaneous realities, and that his visions allowed him to see these other realities. This blending of his personal experiences with his fiction created a unique dynamic where it became increasingly difficult to separate the author from his work. Dick wasn't just writing about characters who questioned their reality, he was living that experience himself. This added a layer of authenticity and urgency to his writing that resonated deeply with readers. Dick's life and work challenge our understanding of what it means to live a double life. Unlike spies or con artists who consciously create alternate identities, Dick seemed to exist in multiple realities simultaneously. He was both the author creating fictional worlds and a character navigating those worlds. He was a science fiction writer exploring futuristic concepts and a modern-day mystic grappling with divine revelations. This duality extended to his public and private personas as well. To the outside world, he was Philip K. Dick, the prolific science fiction author known for his mind-bending stories. But in private, he was a man struggling with mental health issues, grappling with profound philosophical and theological questions, and trying to make sense of experiences that defied rational explanation. Dick's struggles with mental health and substance abuse added another layer to his complex identity. He was open about his use of amphetamines, which he initially took to increase his writing productivity. However, this drug use exacerbated his paranoia and may have contributed to some of his more extreme experiences and beliefs. In 1971, Dick's home was burglarized, an event that deeply affected him and fueled his paranoia. He began to suspect that he might have been the target of government surveillance, possibly due to his anti-war stance and counterculture connections. This paranoia found its way into his writing, with many of his characters facing shadowy conspiracies and hidden threats. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, Dick continued to produce groundbreaking work. His novel, Ubik, published in 1969, is considered one of his masterpieces. The story, which deals with questions of reality, identity, and life after death, reflects many of the themes that would become central to Dick's later experiences and writings. Throughout his life, Dick's work often predicted or paralleled real-world developments in technology and society. His explorations of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and corporate power seem prescient in our current age. In a sense, Dick was living in the future he was writing about, seeing potential realities that others couldn't yet perceive. In the end, his life serves as a reminder that the most profound truths often lie at the intersection of reality and imagination, challenging us to look beyond the surface and question the nature of our existence. In doing so, we might just discover, as Dick did, that the universe is stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined.
Family man's double life. Charles Augustus Lindbergh, the famed American aviator who made the first solo non-stop transatlantic flight in 1927, is primarily known for his pioneering achievements in aviation and the tragic kidnapping and murder of his young son. However, there's a lesser-known chapter in Lindbergh's life that reveals a startling double life he led for years, making him one of history's most unexpected imposters. Lindbergh's story as an imposter begins in the aftermath of his son's kidnapping in 1932. The crime, dubbed the crime of the century, thrust Lindbergh and his wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh, into an unwanted spotlight. The intense media scrutiny and public attention became overwhelming for the couple, leading them to seek refuge in Europe in late 1935. It was during this time in Europe that Lindbergh began to construct an alternate identity for himself. Officially, he and his family were living in England, where Lindbergh worked with scientists to develop an artificial heart. However, Lindbergh's movements during this period were often shrouded in mystery, and it's now known that he was leading a secret life that would remain hidden for decades. In 1957, Lindbergh met a woman named Brigitte Hessheimer in Munich, Germany. Brigitte was a hat maker, 24 years younger than Lindbergh. What began as a chance encounter soon developed into a long-term clandestine relationship. Lindbergh, still married to Anne, began visiting Brigitte regularly, using the alias Carew Kent. To Brigitte and her family, Carew Kent was an American writer who frequently traveled for work. Lindbergh maintained this false identity meticulously, never revealing his true name or famous status. He would visit Brigitte and their children, they eventually had 3, several times a year, always under the guise of his alter ego. But Lindbergh's deception didn't stop there. In the early 1960s, he began another relationship with Brigitte's sister, Marietta. As with Brigitte, Lindbergh fathered children with Marietta, 2 in this case, all while maintaining his Carew Kent persona. Neither Brigitte nor Marietta was aware of Lindbergh's relationship with the other. If this double life wasn't complex enough, Lindbergh added a third layer to his deception. In the mid-1960s, he began a relationship with his personal secretary in Europe, Valeska, with whom he fathered 2 more children. As with Brigitte and Marietta, Valeska knew Lindbergh only as Carew Kent and was unaware of his true identity or his other families. In total, Lindbergh fathered 7 children with these 3 women, all while maintaining his marriage to Anne Morrow Lindbergh in the United States. His American family, including his wife and their 5 children, were completely unaware of his European families. Lindbergh's ability to maintain this elaborate charade for over a decade is a testament to his careful planning and the different nature of international travel and communication in the mid-20th century. He would schedule his visits to his European families around his legitimate business trips, often extending these trips by a few days to spend time with his secret families. To maintain his cover, Lindbergh created a complex system of mail drops and relied on trusted friends to forward his correspondence. He never used his real name in communications with his European families and was careful never to be photographed with them. The Carew Kent persona was crafted with care. Lindbergh told his European families that he was a writer who needed to travel frequently for research. This explanation neatly accounted for his prolonged absences and his need for privacy. He also claimed to have suffered a wartime injury that made him sensitive about being photographed, which explained why there were never any pictures of him with his secret families. Lindbergh's imposter life was not just about maintaining false identities, it also involved creating entirely separate personas for each of his families. With Brigitte and her children, he was a devoted, if absent, father who brought gifts from his travels and took an interest in their education and hobbies. With Marietta's family, he played a similar role, but with subtle differences to maintain the illusion of uniqueness in each relationship. The strain of maintaining these separate lives must have been enormous. Lindbergh had to keep track of multiple sets of birthdays, anniversaries, and family events. He had to remember different sets of stories and experiences for each family. ensuring he never mixed up details or revealed information that might expose his deception. Despite the complexity of his deception, Lindbergh managed to keep his double, or rather quadruple life a secret until his death in 1974. It wasn't until 2003, nearly 3 decades after Lindbergh's death, that the truth began to emerge. The revelation came when 3 siblings, Dirk, Astrid, and David Hesheimer, came forward with their suspicion that Charles Lindbergh was their father. They had grown up knowing their father only as Cariu Kent, but as adults, they began to piece together clues that suggested their father's true identity. The siblings pointed to several factors that had led them to this conclusion. They noted physical resemblances between themselves and Lindbergh, as well as similarities in handwriting between their father's letters and Lindbergh's known writings. They also recalled that their father's visits often coincided with Lindbergh's known travels to Germany. To confirm their suspicions, the Hesheimer siblings underwent DNA testing. The results were conclusive. They were indeed the children of Charles Lindbergh. This revelation sent shockwaves through both Germany and the United States, forcing a re-evaluation of Lindbergh's legacy and character. As news of the Hesheimer siblings' discovery spread, more of Lindbergh's secret children came forward. In total, 7 children from 3 different women in Europe were confirmed to be Lindbergh's offspring through DNA testing. The exposure of Lindbergh's secret families raised many questions about the nature of his character and the extent of his deception. How could a man so publicly associated with American values lead such a compartmentalized life? How did he reconcile his public image with his private actions? Lindbergh's motivations for creating and maintaining these secret families remain a subject of speculation. Some have suggested that the trauma of his son's kidnapping and murder may have played a role, driving him to create new families in an environment far removed from the painful memories of his past. Others have pointed to Lindbergh's complex personality and his lifelong fascination with science and genetics. In his later years, Lindbergh became interested in eugenics and the idea of improving the human race through selective breeding. Some have speculated that his secret families might have been a misguided attempt to put these ideas into practice. Whatever his motivations, Lindbergh's success in maintaining his imposter life for so long is a testament to his meticulous planning and his ability to compartmentalize different aspects of his life. For Lindbergh's children, both in America and Europe, the revelations have been life-changing. The American Lindbergh children have had to grapple with a new understanding of their father and his character. The European children, who grew up knowing their father only as Cariu Kent, have had to reconcile their memories with the knowledge that their father was one of the most famous men of the 20th century.
Double life of Anthony Blunt, the respected art historian and British spy, whose exposure sent shockwaves through the establishment. Anthony Frederick Blunt was born in Bournemouth, England, in 1907. Born into a respectable middle-class family, Blunt showed early promise as a scholar. He attended Marlborough College before winning a scholarship to Trinity College, Cambridge, in 1926. It was at Cambridge that Blunt's life began to take the shape that would define his future, both public and secret. Cambridge in the late 1920s and early 1930s was a hotbed of intellectual and political activity. Blunt initially studied mathematics, but soon switched to modern languages, excelling in French. His intellectual prowess quickly became apparent, and he was invited to join the Cambridge Apostles, an exclusive and secretive society of intellectuals that had a significant influence on his development. The Apostles provided Blunt with a forum for intellectual discourse and a space to explore his sexuality. Many members, including Blunt, were gay at a time when homosexuality was illegal in Britain. This shared experience of being outsiders in a heteronormative society likely contributed to their sense of alienation from the establishment and their attraction to radical ideologies. It was through the Apostles that Blunt met Guy Burgess, who would later become a fellow Soviet spy. Burgess introduced Blunt to Marxist theory, which had a profound impact on his worldview. The economic depression of the early 1930s, coupled with the rise of fascism in Europe, convinced many young intellectuals like Blunt that capitalism was failing and that communism offered a viable alternative. During his time at Cambridge, Blunt also developed his passion for art history. He was particularly influenced by the Bloomsbury Group, a circle of artists and intellectuals that included figures like Roger Fry and Clive Bell. Their approach to art criticism, which emphasized formal analysis over historical context, would shape Blunt's own work as an art historian. After graduating with first-class honours in 1930, Blunt stayed on at Cambridge to pursue a fellowship. He completed his fellowship dissertation on artistic theory in France from 1660 to 1720, which was published as a book in 1940. This work established Blunt as a promising young scholar in the field of art history. In 1933, Blunt travelled to France for a year of study. It was during this period that he is believed to have been recruited as a Soviet agent, although the exact circumstances of his recruitment remain unclear. Upon his return to Cambridge, Blunt began his career as a don, teaching French art and architecture. As a young professional, Blunt quickly made a name for himself in the world of art history. In 1937, at the age of just 30, he was appointed to a position at the Courtauld Institute of Art in London. The Courtauld was then, and remains, one of the world's leading centres for the study of art history, and this appointment marked Blunt as a rising star in his field. At the Courtauld, Blunt's research focused primarily on 17th century French and Italian art. He became particularly known for his work on Nicolas Poussin, publishing several influential books and articles on the artist. Blunt's approach to art history was characterized by its rigorous scholarship and attention to detail. He combined close formal analysis of artworks with extensive archival research, setting new standards for art historical scholarship. Despite his growing professional success, Blunt continued his clandestine activities for Soviet intelligence. He used his position and connections to gather information and recruit other agents. The full extent of his espionage activities during this period is still not entirely known, but it's believed that he passed significant information to his Soviet handlers. When World War II broke out in 1939, Blunt, like many of his contemporaries, sought ways to contribute to the war effort. In 1940, he joined the British Army, serving in the Intelligence Corps. After a brief period of military service, he was recruited by MI5, the British Domestic Intelligence Agency, in 1941. Blunt's position in MI5 gave him access to highly sensitive information, which he passed on to Soviet intelligence. This period of his double life was perhaps the most active in terms of his espionage activities. After the war, Blunt returned to his academic career, but maintained his connections with Soviet intelligence. In 1945, Blunt's professional life took another significant turn when he was appointed surveyor of the King's Pictures. This prestigious position put him in charge of the Royal Collection, one of the world's greatest art collections. It also brought him into close contact with the royal family, adding another layer of complexity to his double life as a Soviet agent. Throughout these early professional years, Blunt managed to balance his public role as a respected art historian with his secret life as a Soviet spy. His intellectual brilliance, combined with his charm and connections, allowed him to move effortlessly in elite circles while harboring his dangerous secret. Blunt's espionage activities began to diminish after the war, but his academic career continued to flourish. He became a leading figure in the British art world, known for his expertise and his influential writings on art history. In 1956, he was knighted for his services to art, a supreme irony given his secret past. The facade finally crumbled in 1964 when Blunt was confronted by MI5 with evidence of his espionage activities. In exchange for immunity from prosecution, he confessed to his role as a Soviet agent. However, this confession was kept secret. Prime Minister Alec Douglas Home and a small circle of senior officials decided that the potential embarrassment to the establishment outweighed the benefits of a public disclosure. For the next 15 years, Blunt continued to lead his double life, but now with the added burden of knowing that his secret was known to some in the highest echelons of power. He remained surveyor of the Queen's Pictures until his retirement in 1972 and continued to be a respected figure in the art world. The truth finally came to light in 1979 when Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher exposed Blunt's treachery in a statement to the House of Commons. The revelation sent shockwaves through British society. How could a knight of the realm, a man who had worked closely with the royal family, have been a Soviet spy? The exposure of Blunt's double life led to his public disgrace. he was stripped of his knighthood and his fellowship of the British Academy. His reputation as an art historian, built over decades of scholarly work, was tarnished by his espionage activities. In the aftermath of the revelation, Blunt largely retreated from public life, emerging only to give a press conference in which he attempted to explain his actions. Blunt's story is a classic tale of a double life, but it's far from unique. Throughout history, individuals have assumed secret identities or led clandestine parallel lives for various reasons. Some, like Blunt, were spies. Others were criminals hiding in plain sight, or individuals living out secret identities for personal reasons. In the end, the story of Anthony Blunt is more than just a tale of espionage and betrayal. It's a human story that touches on universal themes of identity, loyalty, and the search for meaning. It's a reminder that even the most respectable facades may hide complex and contradictory realities. As we continue to grapple with issues of trust, privacy, and personal integrity in our increasingly interconnected world, the lessons of Blunt's double life remain startlingly relevant. Of George Psalmanazzar. Imposters have challenged our understanding of truth, identity, and the power of storytelling. Among these fascinating figures, few can match the audacity and creativity of George Psalmanazzar, the man who convinced 18th century England that he was a native of Formosa, modern-day Taiwan. George Psalmanazzar, whose real name and origins remain a mystery to this day, emerged on the European scene in the early 1700s. He claimed to be the first Formosan to visit Europe, and his exotic tales of life on this little-known island captivated the imagination of British society. Psalmanazzar's story is not just one of deception, but also of intellectual prowess, cultural fabrication, and ultimately, redemption. The exact date and place of Psalmanazzar's birth are unknown, but it's believed he was born in southern France around 1679. Little is known about his early life, which adds to the mystique surrounding his character. What is known is that he received a good education, likely in a Jesuit school, which provided him with the intellectual foundation for his later deceptions. Psalmanazzar's journey as an imposter began in his late teens or early 20s. He left his home and began traveling across Europe, initially posing as an Irish pilgrim. Finding this identity insufficiently exotic to garner the attention he craved, he soon developed a more outlandish persona. It was around 1702 that Psalmanazzar began to claim he was a native of Formosa. He chose this island strategically. At the time, Formosa was known to Europeans primarily through limited accounts from Dutch traders, leaving much to the imagination. This lack of widespread knowledge about Formosan culture and customs gave Psalmanazzar the freedom to invent elaborate details about his supposed homeland. Psalmanazzar's reinvention of himself as a Formosan was comprehensive. He created an entire fictional Formosan culture, complete with its own language, alphabet, and religious practices. He claimed that Formosa was a prosperous country, ruled by an emperor who lived in a capital city made of gold and silver. According to Psalmanazzar, Formosan society practiced polygamy, cannibalism, and human sacrifice. One of the most outrageous aspects of Psalmanazzar's fabricated Formosan identity was his claim about the island's religious practices. He asserted that thousands of young boys were sacrificed annually to appease a deity, and that their hearts were eaten by the Formosan elite. These sensational claims, while horrifying to his European audience, only served to increase fascination with his story. Psalmanazzar's physical appearance didn't match the typical European conception of an East Asian person. To explain this, he claimed that Formosans, particularly those of noble birth like himself, had lighter skin and hair. He also adopted peculiar habits to support his exotic persona, such as eating raw meat and sleeping upright in a chair. Perhaps most impressively, Psalmanazzar created an entire Formosan language. He developed a complex alphabet and grammatical system, and could converse fluently in this invented tongue. This linguistic feat lent considerable credibility to his claims, as few could imagine someone capable of inventing an entire language on the spot. Psalmanazzar's elaborate deception might have remained a minor curiosity had he not encountered William Innes, a Scottish chaplain in 1702. Innes was taken in by Psalmanazzar's story and saw an opportunity to advance his own career. He took Psalmanazzar under his wing and brought him to London, introducing him to influential members of British society. Upon arriving in London, Psalmanazzar quickly became a sensation. He was invited to give lectures about Formosa at Oxford University and was even granted an audience with the Bishop of London. His exotic tales and seemingly vast knowledge of an unknown land captivated the imagination of the British public and intellectual elite alike. In 1704, Psalmanazzar published his most famous work, an historical and geographical description of Formosa, an island subject to the Emperor of Japan. This book was a tour de force of imaginative fabrication, providing detailed descriptions of Formosan geography, politics, religion, and customs. The book was a commercial success and was translated into several languages, spreading Psalmanazzar's fame across Europe. What makes Psalmanazzar's deception particularly remarkable is that he managed to fool even those who should have known better. Despite inconsistencies in his story and the fantastic nature of many of his claims, learned scholars and clergymen defended his authenticity. This speaks not only to Psalmanazzar's skill as a deceiver, but also to the willingness of European society to believe in exotic tales from distant lands. However, not everyone was convinced by Psalmanazzar's story. Notably, Edmund Halley, of Halley's Comet fame, challenged Psalmanazzar's astronomical knowledge, finding it lacking for someone supposedly educated in Formosa. Jesuits who had actually visited Formosa also disputed his claims. Despite these challenges, Psalmanazzar managed to maintain his deception for several years. Psalmanazzar's fame began to wane as more accurate information about Formosa became available, and skepticism about his claims grew. By 1706, he had largely withdrawn from public life, though he continued to maintain his Formosan identity for some time. The later part of Psalmanazzar's life took a surprising turn. Around 1717, he underwent what he described as a religious conversion. He began to feel deep remorse for his deceptions and gradually withdrew from his fabricated identity. However, it wasn't until much later in his life that he fully confessed to his fraudulent past. In his later years, Psalmanazzar reinvented himself once again, this time as a repentant sinner and man of letters. He became a respected figure in London's literary circles, befriending Samuel Johnson and contributing to scholarly works. Johnson, in particular, held Psalmanazzar in high regard, saying of him, "I should as soon think of contradicting a bishop." Psalmanazzar's most revealing work, commonly known by the name of George Psalmanazzar, a reputed native of Formosa, was published posthumously in 1764. In this autobiography, he finally admitted to his lifelong deception and provided some insight into his motivations and methods. However, true to form, he still maintained some mystery by never revealing his real name or place of birth. The tale of George Psalmanazzar also provides an interesting lens through which to view 18th century European attitudes towards the wider world. The readiness with which his fantastic tales were believed reveals much about the mindset of the time. There was a hunger for stories of exotic lands and peoples, often with little regard for accuracy. Psalmanazzar's success exploited this desire, feeding into existing stereotypes and prejudices about non-European cultures. As we continue to grapple with issues of identity, cultural understanding, and the nature of truth in our increasingly interconnected world, the story of George Psalmanazzar remains surprisingly relevant. It reminds us to approach extraordinary claims with a critical eye, to seek understanding rather than exoticism in our encounters with other cultures, and to recognize the complex motivations that can drive people to create false narratives about themselves and others. The life of Ferdinand Waldo Demara. Throughout history, there have been individuals who have led double lives, often for reasons ranging from espionage to personal gain, or simply to escape their past. These individuals have captivated our imagination, blurring the lines between reality and fiction, truth and deception. Among these fascinating characters, few can match the audacity and sheer breadth of deception achieved by Ferdinand Waldo Demara Jr., often referred to as the Great Imposter. Born in Lawrence, Massachusetts on December 21, 1921, Ferdinand Waldo Demara Jr. would go on to lead a life so extraordinary that it would inspire books, films, and countless discussions about the nature of identity and the limits of human potential. Demara's story is not just one of deception, but also of raw talent, quick thinking, and an uncanny ability to adapt to almost any situation. Demara's early life was relatively unremarkable. He was born into a middle-class family, the son of a movie theater operator. However, the Great Depression hit the family hard, causing them to lose their theater and fall into poverty. This dramatic change in circumstances may have been the catalyst for Demara's future exploits, as he realized early on the power of reinvention. At the age of 16, Demara left home to join a Trappist monastery, marking the beginning of his journey of assumed identities. However, monastic life didn't suit him for long. He left after a few months, setting the stage for what would become a lifetime of impersonations and false identities. What makes Demara's story truly remarkable is not just the number of identities he assumed, but the high-stakes professions he managed to infiltrate. Over the course of his career, Demara impersonated a wide array of professionals, including a civil engineer, a sheriff's deputy, a doctor of applied psychology, a lawyer, a childcare expert, a Benedictine monk, a Trappist monk, an editor, a cancer researcher, and perhaps most famously, a surgeon in the Royal Canadian Navy. One of Demara's most audacious and well-known impersonations occurred during the Korean War. Using the stolen identity of Dr. Joseph Sear, a real Canadian physician, Demara enlisted in the Royal Canadian Navy. He was assigned as a trauma surgeon on the HMCS Cayuga, a destroyer participating in the Korean War. Despite having no formal medical training, Demara managed to perform a series of successful surgeries on 16 Korean combat casualties. His most notable operation involved removing a bullet lodged near a soldier's heart. Demara reportedly stayed up all night studying a medical textbook before successfully completing the surgery the next day. Demara's success as a naval surgeon came to an abrupt end when the mother of the real Dr. Joseph Sear read about her son's supposed exploits in the newspaper. The deception was uncovered, but remarkably, due to his successful surgeries and the absence of any patient complaints, Demara was not charged with any crime by the Canadian military. He was, however, deported back to the United States. What set Demara apart from other imposters was his uncanny ability to quickly learn and excel in the roles he assumed. He possessed a photographic memory and a genius-level IQ, which allowed him to rapidly absorb information and convincingly play his parts. More than just memorizing facts, Demara seemed to have a knack for understanding the essence of the professions he impersonated, allowing him to make decisions and solve problems as if he were genuinely trained in these fields. Demara's motivations for his deceptions were complex. Unlike many imposters who assume false identities for financial gain, Demara seemed more driven by a desire for respect, admiration, and the thrill of the deception itself. He often took on roles in charitable or religious organizations, suggesting a desire to do good, albeit through fraudulent means. In his later years, Demara claimed that his imposter lifestyle began as a way to escape his past and the disappointments of his early life. He once said, "I was born with a different kind of intelligence. I'm not sure what kind it is. I have the ability to absorb a large amount of information quickly and remember it. I learned how to take that information and use it in practical ways." Demara's life as an imposter wasn't without its challenges and close calls. He was discovered and exposed multiple times throughout his career, leading to job losses, deportations, and occasional brushes with the law. However, his charm, quick thinking, and ability to disappear and re-emerge under a new identity allowed him to continue his deceptions for decades. One of Demara's other notable impersonations was that of Ben W. Jones, a psychology professor. Under this identity, he taught at Glenville State College in West Virginia. His students reportedly found him to be an excellent teacher, despite his lack of formal qualifications. This episode highlights Demara's natural teaching ability and his skill at adapting to complex professional environments. Demara's life of deception raises intriguing questions about the nature of identity and qualification. In many of the roles he assumed, he performed admirably, sometimes even excelling beyond those with formal training. This success challenges our understanding of expertise and the value of traditional education versus natural ability and quick learning. The ethical implications of Demara's actions are complex. On one hand, his deceptions put lives at risk, particularly when he impersonated medical professionals. On the other hand, he often provided valuable services to communities and individuals who might otherwise have gone without. His successful surgeries during the Korean War, for instance, saved lives that might have been lost without his intervention. Demara's story also sheds light on the social structures and verification systems of his time. In an era before instant background checks and digital records, Demara was able to move between identities with relative ease. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of proper vetting and the potential consequences of taking credentials at face value. As news of Demara's exploits spread, he gained a level of notoriety that both helped and hindered his efforts. He became known as the Great Imposter, a nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life. This fame made it increasingly difficult for him to assume new identities, as people began to recognize him from media reports. In 1960, Demara's story gained wider attention with the release of the film The Great Imposter, starring Tony Curtis. The film, while taking some liberties with the details of Demara's life, brought his remarkable story to a broader audience and cemented his place in popular culture. Demara's later years were marked by attempts to capitalize on his notoriety. He appeared on the television show You Bet Your Life with Groucho Marx and gave numerous interviews about his experiences. He also worked on an autobiography titled The Great Imposter, which was published in 1960. However, even as he seemingly embraced his true identity, Demara found it difficult to escape the allure of impersonation. In 1967, at the age of 46, he was arrested for attempting to cash a forged check. This incident suggested that despite his fame and apparent desire to reform, the compulsion to deceive remained strong. Towards the end of his life, Demara worked as a counselor at a hospital in Anaheim, California. In a twist of irony, he was employed under his real name and with genuine credentials. He passed away on June 7, 1982, at the age of 60, leaving behind a legacy that continues to fascinate and perplex. In the end, the tale of Ferdinand Waldo Demara Jr. is more than just a series of audacious impersonations. It's a human story of ambition, talent, and the desperate desire to be someone else. It challenges us to consider the masks we all wear in our daily lives and the fine line between presenting our best selves and engaging in outright deception. Demara's life, with all its contradictions and complexities, serves as a mirror to our own society, reflecting our fears, aspirations, and the eternal human desire to transcend the circumstances of our birth and become something greater.
The infamous imposter John List. In the annals of criminal history, few cases are as chilling and perplexing as that of John Emil List, a man who not only committed a heinous crime, but also managed to live a double life for nearly 2 decades. List's story is one of meticulous planning, shocking brutality, and an almost unbelievable feat of long-term imposture. Born on September 17, 1925 in Bay City, Michigan, John List grew up in a strict Lutheran household. His upbringing instilled in him a rigid sense of morality and an obsession with financial stability. These traits would later play a crucial role in both his crimes and his ability to evade capture for so long. List's early life seemed unremarkable. He served in the US Army during World War II and the Korean War, rising to the rank of second lieutenant. After his military service, he earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in accounting. He married Helen Taylor in 1951, and the couple had 3 children: Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. On the surface, List appeared to be living the American dream. He had a good job as an accountant, a loving family, and a beautiful home. However, beneath this facade of normalcy, List was struggling with financial problems and a deep-seated sense of failure. The turning point came in 1971, when List's career began to unravel. He lost his job as a vice president at a Jersey City bank and started embezzling money from his mother's account. Despite finding work as a part-time bookkeeper, List's financial situation continued to deteriorate. Faced with mounting debts and the prospect of losing his family's 19-room Victorian mansion in Westfield, New Jersey, List began to contemplate a drastic and horrifying solution. On November 9, 1971, John List committed an act that would shock the nation and set him on a path of deception. In a meticulously planned series of events, List murdered his entire family. His wife Helen, 46, his daughter Patricia, 16, his two sons, John Jr., 15, and Frederick, 13, and his 85-year-old mother, Alma. After the murders, List cleaned the crime scene, turned on all the lights in the house, and tuned the radio to a religious station. In a final act of meticulous planning, List left a 5-page letter to his pastor explaining his actions. He claimed that he had killed his family to save their souls from the sinful world, and that he expected to be reunited with them in heaven. This letter, along with his subsequent actions, provides a chilling insight into List's disturbed psyche and his ability to rationalize his heinous acts. With the scene set, John List embarked on his new life as an imposter. He drove to Kennedy Airport in New York, ditched his car in the long-term parking lot, and disappeared. It would be nearly 2 decades before the truth of what happened to John List would come to light. List's disappearance and the discovery of the murders sparked one of the largest manhunts in New Jersey history. However, despite extensive efforts by law enforcement, List seemed to have vanished without a trace. His planning had been meticulous, leaving investigators with few leads to follow. Meanwhile, List had begun his life as an imposter. He moved to Denver, Colorado, where he assumed the identity of Robert Peter Clark. This name was not randomly chosen. It belonged to a college student List had known in Michigan years earlier. By taking on the identity of a real person, List added an extra layer of authenticity to his disguise. In Denver, Robert Clark quickly established himself as a model citizen. He joined a Lutheran church, became active in the congregation, and found work as an accountant. To those who knew him, Clark was a quiet, hard-working man who kept to himself but was always polite and helpful. List's ability to seamlessly integrate into his new life speaks volumes about his skills as an imposter. He managed to create an entirely new persona, complete with a fabricated backstory, without raising suspicion. His strict Lutheran upbringing, which had once been a source of rigid morality, now served as a perfect cover for his reclusive nature. In 1979, List's imposture took on a new dimension when he married Dolores Miller, a woman he met through his church. Dolores had no idea about her new husband's true identity or the horrible crimes he had committed. For the next decade, List lived as Robert Clark, building a life that was in many ways a twisted mirror image of the one he had destroyed. List's success as an imposter was due in large part to his unremarkable appearance and his ability to blend into the background. He was described by those who knew him as Clark as a quiet, unassuming man who never drew attention to himself. This anonymity, combined with his meticulous attention to detail in maintaining his false identity, allowed him to evade detection for years. However, List's past was never far behind him. He lived in constant fear of discovery, always looking over his shoulder and avoiding situations that might expose his true identity. This paranoia manifested in small ways, such as his refusal to be photographed or his habit of using cash instead of credit cards. Despite these precautions, List's imposture began to unravel in 1989, 18 years after the murders. The break in the case came from an unlikely source, the television show America's Most Wanted. The program featured a segment on the List murders, including a clay bust created by forensic sculptor Frank Bender that showed what List might look like after 18 years. The bust was remarkably accurate, and it caught the attention of List's neighbors in Richmond, Virginia, where he had moved with Dolores in 1988. They recognized their quiet neighbor, Robert Clark, in the aged representation of John List. On June 1, 1989, after an anonymous tip to the authorities, John List was finally arrested at his accounting office in Richmond. The arrest of John List sent shockwaves through the communities where he had lived as Robert Clark. Friends, co-workers, and even his wife of 10 years were stunned to learn the true identity of the man they thought they knew. The revelation of List's double life forced many to question their ability to truly know those around them. List's capture and the subsequent trial brought to light the full extent of his deception. For nearly 2 decades, he had successfully lived as another person, building relationships and a career while carrying the weight of his horrific crimes. His ability to compartmentalize his past actions and present a normal facade to the world speaks to a level of psychological detachment that is both fascinating and disturbing. During his trial, List showed little remorse for his actions. He maintained that he had killed his family to save them from financial ruin and what he perceived as moral decay in society. This twisted logic, combined with his years of successful imposture, painted a picture of a man who had created his own warped reality. List was found guilty on 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms in prison. He died in prison in 2008 at the age of 82, never fully explaining the depths of his deception or expressing genuine remorse for his crimes. The psychological aspects of List's imposture are equally fascinating. His ability to compartmentalize his past actions and present a normal facade to the world suggests a level of dissociation that borders on the pathological. Yet at the same time, his constant fear of discovery indicates that he was never fully able to escape the reality of what he had done. In the end, the story of John List is a tragedy on multiple levels. It is, first and foremost, a story of lives cut short by senseless violence. But it is also a story of a life lived in fear and deception, of a man who chose to destroy everything he had and live as a shadow rather than face his failures. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of rigid thinking, the destructive power of shame, and the horrifying lengths to which some will go to maintain a facade of respectability.
Throughout history, there have been individuals who have led extraordinary double lives, weaving intricate webs of deception that often unraveled in the most spectacular ways. Today, we delve into the fascinating world of these master imposters, with a special focus on one of the most audacious con artists of the 21st century, the man known as Clark Rockerfeller. But before we dive into Rockerfeller's tale, let's set the stage with a few other notable individuals who lived double lives and whose stories we will feature in depth in subsequent episodes. Consider Frank Abagnale Jr., whose life inspired the film Catch Me If You Can. Abagnale himself once said he was just a kid playing a game, but the game got out of control. Then there's the case of Ferdinand Waldo Demara, known as the Great Imposter. Demara assumed numerous identities throughout his life, including a ship's doctor, a civil engineer, and a Trappist monk. Demara famously claimed, "I am who I say I am, and in that sense, I'm honest." These stories, while incredible, pale in comparison to the audacious deceptions of the man who called himself Clark Rockerfeller. The tale of Clark Rockerfeller is one of the most intricate and long-running imposter stories in recent history. For nearly 2 decades, this man convinced the world he was a scion of the wealthy and influential Rockefeller family. But the truth behind his identity was far stranger than fiction. In the bustling streets of New York City in the 1990s, a charming and well-spoken man began to make his presence known in high society circles. He introduced himself as Clark Rockerfeller, a member of the famous Rockefeller family. Clark quickly became a fixture in elite social gatherings. He spoke eloquently about art, wore tailor-made suits, and exuded the confidence of old money. People were drawn to his charisma and his apparent connections. Sandra Boss, a high-powered business consultant, fell for Clark's charms. They married in 1995, and Clark continued to weave an increasingly complex web of lies about his background. He claimed his parents had died in a car crash when he was young, that he was raised by private tutors and had traveled the world. It was, he said, a privileged but lonely childhood. But as convincing as Clark's story seemed, cracks began to appear. Sandra noticed inconsistencies in his tales, and his refusal to provide documentation for anything, including their marriage license, began to raise suspicions. She would later describe trying to verify his stories as like trying to hold on to smoke. Every time she questioned something, he had an explanation that seemed plausible at the moment, but in hindsight was utterly ridiculous. The truth was, Clark Rockerfeller was neither a Rockefeller nor was his name Clark. His real identity was that of Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter, a German immigrant who had come to the United States as a young man in the late 1970s. Christian arrived in the US at the age of 17 on a student visa. From the moment he set foot on American soil, he began reinventing himself. Over the next 2 decades, Christian assumed a series of false identities. He was Christopher Chichester, a British aristocrat in California. He was Christopher Crowe, a television producer in Connecticut. Each identity was more elaborate than the last, culminating in his masterpiece, Clark Rockerfeller. Gerhardsreiter was a chameleon. He had an uncanny ability to research and assume new identities, complete with backstories and mannerisms that fooled even the most discerning individuals. But like all long-running cons, Clark's facade eventually began to crumble. In 2007, after 12 years of marriage, Sandra Boss filed for divorce. The proceedings forced Clark to provide documentation he couldn't produce, and his carefully constructed world started to unravel. In 2008, the story took a dramatic turn. After losing custody of his daughter in the divorce, Clark abducted the child during a supervised visit in Boston. This act set off a nationwide manhunt and brought intense scrutiny to Clark's background. As law enforcement dug deeper, the truth about his identity came to light. The man known as Clark Rockerfeller was arrested in Baltimore a week after the kidnapping. As news of his true identity spread, those who had known him as Clark were left stunned and bewildered. Many described it as finding out their best friend was an alien, wondering how they could all have been so thoroughly fooled. But the revelations about Christian Gerhartsreiter's past weren't over. As investigators delved deeper into his history, they uncovered a dark secret from his time in California in the 1980s. Evidence emerged linking Gerhartsreiter to the disappearance of a California couple, John and Linda Sohus, in 1985. Suddenly, this wasn't just about fraud and kidnapping anymore. In 2013, Gerhartsreiter was put on trial for the murder of John Sohus. The prosecution alleged that while living under the identity of Christopher Chichester, Gerhartsreiter had killed Sohus and buried him in the backyard of the guest house where he was staying. After a 6-week trial, Gerhartsreiter was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. The story of Christian Karl Gerhartsreiter, aka Clark Rockerfeller, is a testament to the power of deception and the human capacity for reinvention. For nearly 3 decades, he navigated American high society, leaving a trail of confused and betrayed individuals in his wake. From a psychological perspective, Gerhartsreiter's case is fascinating. He displays classic traits of a sociopath: charm, manipulation, lack of empathy, but also an extreme commitment to his false identities that goes beyond typical con artistry. Gerhartsreiter's charisma and intelligence allowed him to craft convincing backstories and adapt to different social situations with ease. He exploited people's assumptions about class and status, knowing that many would be too polite or intimidated to question someone they believed to be from a prestigious family. The story of Clark Rockerfeller serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of taking people at face value and the ease with which a skilled imposter can manipulate social norms and expectations. It changed the way law enforcement approaches identity verification, highlighting vulnerabilities in our systems and the need for more thorough background checks, even for individuals who seem above suspicion. As for Christian Karl Gerhartsreiter, he continues to serve his sentence in a California state prison. His daughter, now an adult, has no contact with him. Sandra Boss has rebuilt her life and career, stating that it took her years to process what happened. She's learned valuable lessons about trust and the importance of verifying information, even when it comes from someone you think you know intimately. In an age of social media and carefully curated online personas, the lessons from Gerhartsreiter's decades-long deception are perhaps more relevant than ever. They remind us to approach the world with a balance of openness and healthy skepticism, to verify rather than assume, and to remember that sometimes truth is indeed stranger than fiction.